We will talk about the roles of hormones during birth and lactation. We will interpret graphs and depicting the influences of oxytocin, progesterone, and prostaglandin on the uterus. We will discuss the role of stretch receptors in the cervix in an oxytocin positive feedback cycle. It also requires the influence of oxytocin and stress hormones such as catecholamines, including adrenaline, on ensuring birth and the later letdown of milk. We will discuss role of prolactin stimulated by beta endorphin, which also stimulated lung development in the fetus, and it's important for breastfeeding. Now, let me introduce you to the following hormones first. We have oxytocin, that's the love hormone. We have the beta endorphins, the hormones of pleasure and transcendence, and prolactin, the mothering hormone. Adrenaline gives you rush of energy. Noradrenaline treats low blood pressure and depression. And endorphins, that's for the body's natural pain reliever. And then we have relaxin, that thins the cervix in preparation for childbirth, and prostaglandin, which triggers further uterine contractions. So the labor hormones that are directly linked with labor are PROP. These are prostaglandins, yes. What do? They work with oxytocin causing contractions. Then second, PROP. So what is second? R stands for relaxin. Very good. Produced by the placenta. It relaxes the ligaments in the pelvis. And then PRO. O stands for oxytocin. That's the love hormone. In this case, it contributes to a positive feedback cycle with the contractions. And P stands for prolactin, for producing milk. So do you remember progesterone levels decrease during the trimester, that is at the end of your pregnancy, because progesterone inhibits the contraction of the muscles of the uterus, also called myometrium. So while levels of estrogen and prolactin rise, because estrogen stimulates the uterine contractions, prolactin, a hormone that stimulates milk production, increases, readying the breasts for lactation, so giving milk. Many mothers will experience secretion from the mammary glands near the end of the third trimester. The data suggests that prolactin might have a role also in lung maturation in the human fetus. So levels of the hormone relaxin also spike, which thins the cervix in preparation for childbirth. In addition, relaxin initiates labor and facilitates delivery of the baby by dilating the cervix and increasing flexibility of ligaments and the bones. And we need that because we need to push a baby through. So, what is progesterone? That's a hormone, and it inhibits the contraction of the muscles of the uterus. And estrogen stimulates uterine contractions. Very good. And what does prolactin do? Stimulates milk production. Very good. And it's also important for the lung maturation in the fetus. And relaxin initiates labor. Very good. So during the birth process, we have a positive feedback cycle. And what do I mean? We mean that some, consequence of hormone secretion acts on the secretory cells to provide a drive for secretion, rather than being self-limiting, as with the negative feedback. So, for example, if it's cold, you put something warm on, that would be the negative cycle. But this cycle just gets intense and intenser. So positive feedback systems are very unusual in biology, as they terminate with some explosive event. But a good example of a positive feedback system involves oxytocin and its other effect, causing contraction of the uterine muscle during childbirth. In this case, the stimulus for oxytocin secretion is dilation of the uterine cervix. Upon receipt of this information through the sensory nerves, the brain signals the release of oxytocin from nerve endings in the posterior pituitary gland. Enhanced uterine contraction in response to oxytocin results in greater dilation of the cervix, which strengthens the signal for oxytocin release, and so on, until the infant is expelled from the uterine cavity. So let's try and see if we understand that. Number 1. These are the uterine contractions at the onset of parturition, that's labor. Apply mild stretch to the cervix. Number 2. In response to sensory input from the cervix, the blue arrows, oxytocin is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland and stimulates, the green arrows, further contractions of the uterus, which in turn stimulates secretion of more oxytocin. Number 3. Leading to a further stretch of the cervix and even more oxytocin secretion. Number 4. Until the fetus is expelled. That's on number 5. So the chemical regulators of the birthing process include oxytocin, estrogen, progesterone, and prostaglandin. After 9 months, the baby stretches the wall of the uterus. This stress induces the release of chemicals which trigger a rise in the levels of estrogen. It's actually estradiol in particular, but estrogen is fine. It prepares the smooth muscle of the uterus for hormonal stimulation by increasing its sensitivity to oxytocin. Estrogen also inhibits progesterone, which was preventing the uterine contractions from occurring while the fetus developed. Now that the uterus is primed for childbirth, the brain triggers the release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary gland. Oxytocin stimulates the uterine muscles to contract, initiating the birthing process. It also inhibits progesterone secretion. The fetus responds to this uterine contraction by releasing prostaglandins, which triggers further uterine contractions. As the uterine contractions trigger the release of chemicals that cause further contractions, a positive feedback loop ensues. Birth is mediated by positive feedback involving estrogen and oxytocin. The process of childbirth is called parturition and occurs via positive feedback under hormonal control. Positive feedback involves a response that reinforces the change detected. It functions to amplify this change. So let's try and recap this. In case of childbirth, fetal growth eventually causes what to the uterine walls? Stretching. Very good. Which is detected by stretch receptors. This triggers the release of hormones called oxytocin that induce the uterine muscles to contract. Very good. Then there's further reducing space in the womb. This causes more stretching and then hence more contractions until the original stimulus, so the fetus, is removed. So we are giving birth. Contractions will stop when what is complete? When labor is complete and the baby is birthed. Because then there is no more stretching of the uterine wall. Very good.